Welcome, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us. My name is Brendan Skipmark, and I have the pleasure and pretty tall task of trying to take over some of the amazing work that Paul has done at the center. And I want to first just thank you all for coming out. This is such an important event to remember all of the amazing work that Paul has done and will continue to do. I don't see him putting down the mantle anytime soon. So I want to mention that at the end, we're going to have some time for everyone to share some words or comments and chat. But we have a really great lineup put together today. And I'm just going to jump right in and say, we're going to first hear from Dr. Winnie Brownell, a tremendous supporter and advocate for nonviolence and peace studies at URI. Dr. Brownell served as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences from 1999 to 2017 and served the Faculty of Community Studies for over 20 years. Thank you, Dr. Brownell, for your words, reflections, and continued encouragement to nonviolence and peace at URI.
Thank you very much. You do have some rather important shoes to fill, and I wish you the best. I still remember how delighted we all were when we recruited Dr. Paul Bueno de Mesquita to URI in the Department of Psychology, which was then, I'm delighted to say, in the College of Arts and Sciences. I must admit, though, I was a little bit nervous when I heard about his plans to transition to serve as executive director of the center, because I knew what an important voice he was in psychology and how incredibly important he was to the students in the graduate program and colleagues in school psychology. But I got over my nervousness, as I learned to do, when somebody is that passionate and dedicated to serve the greater community beyond just a department in college. And so I ended up being thrilled to see the incredible second act in Paul's career. I realize that very few second acts are quite as dazzling as Paul's has been, and I continue to be impressed. He worked so passionately based on the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi and others, and truly has helped transform the lives of hundreds of thousands of people if we look at the extensions of all who have been touched by Paul and the center. He began to build on the impressive work of Dr. Bernard Lafayette and partners. The center was authorized, I feel it's important to mention, by Dr. then President Robert L. Carruthers via the passionate advocacy of Abu Bakr. I still remember that initial lunch we had with Bernard, which got me very excited from the very beginning, and the contributions of so many dedicated colleagues that Paul worked with and really accomplished so much with, like Charlie Collier and Lynn Derbyshire and Art Stein and Cynthia Hamilton, Gail Ferris, Vanessa Quenu, Linda Palazzo, and so many others. I was impressed as I watched as he and the center team aligned the center activities even more closely with the URI mission of teaching, research, service, and outreach. He helped expand a beloved global community that continues to grow and flourish to this day. I must admit, I was especially thrilled that he also engaged the brilliant Dr. Kay Bueno de Mesquita, who co-authored the book with Dr. Lafayette in Peace and Freedom, that chronicles Lafayette's inspiring to this day civil rights experiences in Selma. Paul transformed the curriculum. He established an interdisciplinary community of students, faculty, alumni, staff, and visitors. He engaged in critical research, produced numerous events, trained nonviolence leaders, performed outreach to children, parents, and citizens, and fostered a culture of nonviolence and peace that we've seen ripple throughout URI and well beyond. The center has been responsible for the recruitment and training of individuals, and my data may be old, but at least 45 countries and 28 states, many that have struggled with some of the most depressing, heartbreaking violence that we've seen in world history, and certified these individuals to be nonviolent, to be certified trainers in nonviolent reconciliation. I had the great pleasure of attending sessions of the Summer Institutes and was so impressed by the passionate dedication and commitment of all involved to learn what they could and to bring those teachings home to their communities and to carry on the work there. Through his work, partner centers were established. Now this sends chills through me, happy chills. In India, Nepal, Haiti, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Congo so far, maybe even more since I paid attention. His book, Kingian Nonviolence, Applications for International and Institutional Change, continues to inspire and educate others about nonviolence and peace strategies. Distinguished alumni Tom Sylvia and the Honorable Shannon Chanley, former member of the New Hampshire House and Senate, established an endowed professorship in nonviolence and peace studies. And I was so delighted to bestow on this honor the professorship on Paul. He was the very first recipient. Art Stein established the first student scholarship, among others that have endowed since. Paul has engaged faculty and community members in so many powerful ways. He helped establish new undergraduate and graduate courses, an interdisciplinary minor, an alternative spring break, and Nepal and independent study projects. I've had the great pleasure of attending so many events that have been led or inspired or engaged Paul and from the center's work. And I still have fond memories, Paul, of the time we all attended the Dalai Lama's speech in Providence. In recognition for his phenomenal work and that of his partners, the center received the Global Peace Incubator Award, the Martin Luther King Peacemaker Award, the Avi Shaper Seek Peace and Pursue It, the Human Rights Award, the National Peacemaker of the Year, and on. Thank you, Paul, for your wonderful legacy. Best wishes on your retirement. I know a few people who have touched as many human beings in their lifetime as you have. I know you will continue your service to others, and we will all benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Winnie. Those were beautiful words, and I'm so glad that you were here to speak them. And it's very, very meaningful to me to have you join us and to recollect some of these experiences that I've had. Am I to, I don't know what the program is. I don't know if I should start speaking now. Is it my turn?
I had planned on introducing you, but
okay, go ahead.
We don't, okay. I'm not sure if the screen is switched or not. It looks like perhaps it hasn't on my screen at least. But I have a brief introduction, and I will say that being sandwiched between you and Winnie as speakers is perhaps maybe not a wise strategy for someone in terms of moving forward. If you would bear with me for just a moment, I actually have a number of recollections and some sentiments for folks who couldn't come to share prior to your speech, if that's reasonable. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kristen Johnson. I am, along with Skip, co-directing the center, following in Paul's footsteps, and there are very large shoes to fill. And so we are certainly in awe and a bit intimidated by the task that we have taken upon us. But I'm honored to introduce my colleague, friend, and nonviolence mentor, Paul Bueno de Mesquita, today. And so one voice cannot summarize his impact at the center, URI, or in the world, nor illustrate the lives he's touched. We might consider, I think, maybe influence beyond the number of trainees, students, or talks as the ripples of lessons in nonviolent practice extend from his classes, summer institutes, or participation in extended networks across space and time and geography. Paul has a really uncanny ability to teach the reluctant and recalcitrant in his work. And we heard a little bit about that actually in the intro before we started. But I wanted to share a story about that. I recently served, Paul's been a key member of the graduate program in international relations for the last many years and served on a number of committees in addition to spearheading a global peace studies track. And I recently served on a comprehensive exam committee for a student in the program. And they had written a response on the efficacy of nonviolence compared to nonviolence protests. The student was someone who had a career in intelligence with multiple military deployments to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, among many other hotspots in the world, and had been initially a very hesitant participant in graduate coursework on nonviolence. And the student in this defense made an airtight case for the efficacy of nonviolent resistance as a superior strategy to violence in seeking change and substantive influence. And I think this, and this is really due to participation in Paul's graduate seminar. This is also a student who's likely to work to shape policy in the federal government and guide key decision-making in the future. And it's an example that illustrates one of Paul's superpowers, if we wanted to call them that: individual connection and touching individual lives and reaching people. And so I think Dr. Brownell shared such a comprehensive overview of Paul's academic contributions and publications in nonviolence and the development and internationalization and institution continuation of Kingian nonviolence. But you know, one of the things that has happened is that he's also incorporated support across undergraduate and graduate levels across programs. And I did also want to note that faculty research at URI has been bolstered by 5 faculty members in interdisciplinary disciplines ranging in geographic focus from India, Pakistan, and Nepal to Mexico and the Ukraine and Italy from the Sylvia Chanley Professorship just since 2011. So that's pretty substantial. I do want to just say too, that Paul's likely largest contribution to this is the continued internationalization and institution of global nonviolence. His longtime colleague and center convener, Art Stein, who's a professor emeritus of political science, shared the observation that Paul's work in nonviolence offers tremendous impact to URI and the Rhode Island community, but his largest contributions to the cause of nonviolence are undoubtedly across the global community and immeasurable. And we can see it from individuals trained at the Summer Institute under the expertise of Paul, Dr. Lafayette, Kay. It spread to work in Rhode Island schools across the country. And I think that Dr. Brownell gave us a list of the scope and scale of influence from Nepal to the Congo to India to Pakistan, the UK, Nigeria, and beyond. Paul also brings his generous spirit and thoughtful engagement to his office and collaborations. Tupten Tenor succinctly summarized his experience in working with Paul as positive, supportive, and encouraging, a sentiment that was echoed by the administrative assistant of the office, Jennifer Diano. Paul's longtime colleague, Charlie Collier, who is not able to join us today, observed that when the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies was founded, that Paul's recognition of the close relationship between nonviolence education and school psychology was immediate. However, unlike the insights many of us have, his led to bold action, that he had shifted his career direction to provide leadership in the center, helping to solidify its position in the university, and his work in sending URI students overseas and in bringing an international class together every summer for the Nonviolence Training Institute spread URI's reputation in the world of nonviolence to every continent. But I'll close with this. Center trainer Roberta Apara describes Paul perhaps most accurately. Training manual in one hand, guitar in the other, holding both, with the heart for music that can change, love for the beloved community, confident belief in students' ability to thrive in right learning, and with ever optimistic hope in peace for the future stands Professor Paul Bueno de Mesquita. And so with that, Paul, I will turn the floor over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I do have my training manual right here on a desk, and I have my guitar right back here. So if we have some extra time, we can do a little bit of training right here on the spot. Thanks very much for those very kind words. And I'll just just want to say how wonderful it is to see everyone here, because as I'll try to say today, it's really the work of everyone in that idea of a beloved community. And I owe all of the, everything I've accomplished has been accomplished in concert with and in teamwork with and with the support of so many, many, many people. And it's, I want to make it clear that it's nothing that I have done alone, for sure. And that's one of the great lessons I've learned in my journey in nonviolence. I'll try to, Tupten, if it's okay, or whoever's controlling, to share my screen. And is that possible?
Yes, Paul.
Okay. And I'll try to get the slideshow going. It was a challenge to try to limit some of these remarks after so many years of doing this work. I titled my comments today, Dreams and Experiments in Nonviolence and Peace, some reflections on evolution, democracy, and the global beloved community. I want to just first of all say a few words of gratitude, and there are just far too many people to mention here, and I know I would leave everyone out, but I certainly want to thank Winnie Brownell and a number of URI administrators. You mentioned Winnie, Bob Carruthers, and Bev Swan and others at the time who saw the enormous importance of nonviolence and peace at the university and its contribution that it could make not just to our campus, but to the broader needs of the United States, our own country, and of course, other places around the world. And I think the current administration, also Dave Dooley and Don DeHaze, certainly have continued their support and their recognition of the role that the center has played and can play in its enormous potential, and the need, given the current circumstances that we're facing, both here at home and elsewhere in the world. But I just want to express my gratitude to really each and every one of you that's here today, and on all of my friends and members of my dear beloved community. And thank you for everything that you have taught me, all the experiences that you have shared, and the lessons that I have learned. And so I want to just maybe, of course, say a little bit about my title here, Dreams and Experiments. King, of course, everybody knows Dr. King for his I Have a Dream speech. And of course, he was an incredible visionary, as we learn in our study of nonviolence and Dr. King, what a visionary thinker he was. One of his key characteristics in the way he approached everything with a vision for the future. And of course, Gandhi. Some of you, of course, you've all heard Gandhi, but maybe you haven't read so much of Gandhi. I began to read more and more of him, and still do. And of course, his autobiography is entitled His Experiments with Truth. And in many ways, when I was reflecting on what could I say after all these years and all these experiences, how could I put any of this together in some kind of coherent talk, I really was drawn to these ideas of dreams and experiments. And that's really the way it's been for me. Well, we all have dreams, And I have to say, I started out with a dream many years ago of a red bicycle. And I rode that bicycle down to, when I finally bought that red bicycle, I had to cut a lot of grass, and I rode that bike down to the harbor in Galveston, Texas, Galveston Island, where I was born and grew up. And there were ships from all over the world there. And my mother worked in the Lipton tea plant there. And she was a fantastic, hardworking woman, a single mother with 3 young children. And I had, because of that, I had a lot of freedom. So when I got my bike, I was footloose and fancy free. And I would ride down to watch the ships come in. And I one day saw a strange man on a ship from India. He wore a turban and a beard. He sort of looked like this man here. I stopped and waved to him, and the ship was docked, and he looked down off the boat and he beckoned me up to the boat. And he pointed to the gangplank and the steps. And so I climbed aboard this huge ship as a like 11, 12-year-old boy. And he gave me spoke with this strange British accent, and he wore this white uniform, and he was the ship's first officer, and he gave me a tour of the ship. He took me into the captain's dining room and we had lunch there. And I asked him if I could go on the ship when it left and be like a cabin boy on the ship. And he said, no, that, I would have to leave the ship. And he led me to the gangway and set me off on my way. But I had this dream that one day I would get on a ship like that and I would go to a faraway place like India. And this was a dream that I had. And there in that tea plant, when I would visit my mom, there were lots of tea chests from all over the world, but mostly they came from India and Ceylon. And I would sometimes go out into the warehouse, this aroma of tea coming out of all these tea chests before they packaged it into the tea bags. And it just excited me to find out where this tea was coming from. Well, many years later, my dream actually became a reality. I'm here in the Delhi airport, this famous statue there. In 2011, and I made many trips back there between 2011, my first trip, and 2019. Actually, some of that was with, I see one of my great travel companions, Dr. Lou Firstman, is on with us. And that was an exciting trip that we had into Nepal, into India and Nepal, and into the Jammu Kashmir state, where I did some trainings there. And eventually I made it to Ceylon, which is now, years later, Sri Lanka. And this last month actually virtually visited Sri Lanka. Here's some photos just of India. There's so many, there are thousands of them. I can't show you all of them, but here's some photos with me and the Bishop of in Nagaland, which is the far northeast region of India. We traveled there and did some fantastic training with the Northeast Institute for Social Science Research. They train hundreds of social workers every year there to meet the needs of the Naga tribal people in far northeast India. It's a region that many people in India never go to or don't even know about. And we spoke to not only trained these social workers, but we spoke to hundreds, or actually I would say thousands of school children there. It was a phenomenal experience. We spent about 2 weeks there in January of 2016, and we're part of 2 conferences, one on sustainable development and another on a national peace convention there. Everywhere talking about Dr. Martin Luther King and his perspectives on beloved community building, the principles, the steps, and doing much of the very same training that we do right here on our own campus. In Sri Lanka last month, I was invited by one of our trainers from Sri Lanka, our only certified URI trainer from our Summer Institute programs, Mam Sajir. And he invited me actually a year ago to a human rights training we did in Delhi. And then finally, I was unable, of course, to go to Sri Lanka, but I had a virtual invitation and delivered a talk to more than 100 students, a sort of mini training in Kingian nonviolence there. So I did get to India and I did get to Sri Lanka. And dreams actually do come true and they're very important. Besides India and Ceylon and Sri Lanka, of course, that trip to India was a stepping stone to Nepal. And right from the very beginning, as a director of the center, I was reaching out to people to find good prospects and recruits to come to our Summer Institute training. And a young student activist who was very instrumental in some of the popular uprisings to establish democracy in Nepal was studying at Notre Dame. And I invited him to come. He did come to the university and stayed with us a few days and talked to students. He was unable to make the Summer Institute because he had other work in the Philippines, but he established what became a training partnership between our center and the Collective Campaign for Peace and Social Work for Development. Then eventually the Tribhuvan University, the large, oldest public university in Nepal. And that began our partnership to bring our students with their students and activists together once a year for an extended nonviolence training there in Nepal. And as a result of that, we have a number of people who have trained with us, who are certified trainers and continue the work there. It's very, very important because you might imagine Nepal, one of the poorest countries in the world, is also a place where various forms of violence are embedded in the culture. It's a very patriarchal society there, and women bear the greatest burden when it comes to various forms of discrimination and gender violence and domestic violence. And it's very, very important to spread the kind of Kingian nonviolence there into their society with these young activists and people who are committed to making a change there. Well, just to say a few words about Bernard Lafayette, because this dream and these dreams coming true, and when Bernard talked to me about the center and he was leaving and what was going to happen, and do you think it could stay? What should he take it? Should he leave it? What's going on? And I said, oh no, this is too valuable. We have to keep the center going, and so one thing led to another, and Bob Carruthers is calling me and saying, do you really want to get into this? Are you, what's your vision for it? What are you going to do with it? And so after some conversations, and then of course, Winnie Brownell, with Dean Brownell's blessing, even though she knew this was like taking on 2 jobs at once. But I had a kind of a bit of a dream there with it, and so I pursued that dream. And I want to say that the first time I met Bernard Lafayette, I had no idea who he was, but my good friend Melvin Wade, who was director of the Center for the Multicultural Center at the time, we had become good friends my first few years there and starting diversity programs and things with him. And he asked me one day, said, Paul, I need a favor. We have an important guest coming and I need a faculty member to introduce this person. And I said, oh, well, I don't know, maybe you should do it, Melvin. I don't know who this is. And he said, well, you know, he's giving a talk tomorrow, and it's like his first, you know, talk and lecture to the campus. And, you know, he's going to be a distinguished scholar here. And I said, oh, well, that sounds very interesting. But, you know, I'm too busy, Melvin. Maybe you should do it, Melvin. He said, Paul, I really need this favor. And I said, okay, what time is it? And he gave me the time. And he said, well, what do I say? Who is this person? And he handed me, you know, he handed me the Vita. And I took it home. And after dinner and watching the news on the couch, I started to read this Vita of Bernard Lafayette Jr. And, you know, after the first few pages, and it was a pretty long Vita, by the way, after the first few pages, I thought, oh my God, you know, this is a civil rights hero who is coming to our campus. And I was so excited, and I stayed up late. I read everything about Bernard Lafayette I could, and I prepared this very, you know, highly academic, very comprehensive introduction. And it was, you know, I was going to give the best introduction I could for Bernard Lafayette. And the next day I walked into the Multicultural Center forum room and was so eager to meet him. And we shook hands, we met. I delivered the introduction, and then so enjoyed hearing him talk. And of course, we chatted a little bit afterwards, and we immediately became very good friends. And I welcomed him to our campus. Soon thereafter, you know, he was saying, you need to get more involved with the center. And, you know, I would run across him, or I'd go visit him at the center, and he'd say, Paul, you've got to do the training. And I said, well, you know, I'm too busy, Bernard. I've got this graduate program. I've got to do this thing. I can't do this training. And I remember coming home and I said to my wife, Kay, they're having a training on nonviolence. Bernard Lafayette's doing it, and I can't do it because of my schedule and everything. Maybe you could do it. And so for a number of weeks, I forget how long, she would do this training on Monday evenings or Wednesday evenings or something. And she would come back after these lengthy night sessions, and she would say, I'd say, well, how'd it go? And she said, Paul, you got to take that training. And so I, as soon as I was able, which was really years later, I freed myself up to take the training, which is not easy to do because it's an intensive training. And in the early days, it was 3 weeks, and there was a practicum component to it. And but when I did it in 2008, it was a 2-week intensive kind of residential for many people. There were about 16 people in our training class. And when I walked in the first day, and I was so happy to do the training, finally, I was so eager. And I walked in, and there were these 15 chairs in a little circle. And I sat down, and then in walked this Buddhist monk in his scarlet robe and sandals. And he walked in and sat next to me. And then soon thereafter, next to him came another Tibetan. And they're talking Tibetan. And we introduce ourselves in the circle, and they stand up, and together they sing what I don't remember, sounded like the Tibet national anthem, some kind of chant. And I remember just thinking to myself, wow, we haven't even gotten to the nonviolence training, and I'm sitting here with 2 Tibetans now. You know, this could be fantastic. And it actually was. And as they say about the trainings, they can be, for many people, if not all, very life transforming. And I connected with this training because I saw it going beyond the work I had done as a psychologist for my entire career, addressing problems of aggression and various kinds of violence, and how we prevent that. And I could see that psychology had a large contribution and role to play. But once I studied and learned what nonviolence was all about, I completely saw that this has enormous potential, far greater than some of the work I had done for decades in psychology on the very same problems. And that I was really, like in the beginning, I didn't know who the heck Bernard Lafayette was. I realized I knew nothing about nonviolence. That I had, my college education, my 2 graduate degrees, decades of work in the academy at the university level, and was totally illiterate about what nonviolence is and could be. And it was a very impactful and transforming experience for me. And I want to thank Bernard so much and express my gratitude for his encouragement, his mentoring, and his being there. Kristen and Skip have said something about filling my shoes. They're much easier to fill, I can tell you, than Bernard's. But I just am so indebted to him for what, in my perspective, was a very life-changing journey that I'm still on. And here's why, because one of the first things I learned about nonviolence and about the center and about Bernard Lafayette was that very important day that we just honored on Sunday, besides being the holy day of Easter. It was April 4th, and that is the commemoration of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis. And Bernard, of course, tells this story much better than I, but basically, few people know that on the morning of April 4th, 1968, while at the end of preparing a press release, I believe, working with Dr. King in the motel room at the Lorraine Motel, as he was getting ready to leave, he was, of course, at the time preparing for the Poor People's Campaign to occur in June. And they were somewhat delayed in the planning and going to Washington to make plans because they were in the Memphis problems with the sanitation workers strike. And Bernard was stopped by Dr. King before he left the room with this statement, more or less a paraphrase: "One more thing. When we finish in Memphis after the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, the next campaign has to be to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence training and education." Why? Because Dr. King had gone to Memphis and had been involved in a march there to support the sanitation workers strike. And there was little planning and little preparation on the ground in Memphis beforehand. And it was a march, unfortunately, that became violent. It was disrupted. And Dr. King was staying in Memphis to see a peaceful march happen. And during his time there is what extended his stay. And he realized that more people needed nonviolence training, the importance of educating people, and so visionary to say, and it had to be not just people in Memphis, but it had to be people globally to internationalize this kind of training and knowledge and skill. And it had to be within institutions, not just something that people did for a protest, but it had to be embedded in schools and community organizations. So the center, of course, was basically grew out of Dr. Lafayette's office as distinguished scholar in residence in the second floor of the Multicultural Center. And that's where it remains today, more than 20 years later, in his former office. And the center has, of course, grown a lot. We've actually kind of outgrown that small office a long time ago. And what Dr. Lafayette started there has continued to grow. And his planting of so many seeds, both on our campus and in Rhode Island and beyond, are really flourishing now. One of the things I learned, besides I knew nothing about nonviolence and I knew nothing about the history of civil rights in our own country and the work of Dr. King. So, you know, I also learned that, you know, we needed to do more, and we had to do lots more kinds of programming to institutionalize these seeds and ideas that Dr. Lafayette had planted here at the university. And so that was sort of part of what, you know, I began to dream about, and also what I began to experiment with. And I didn't really know too much about, you know, what these issues were happening around the world. I had heard a little bit about this or that. And so I knew nothing about, you know, like the uprisings in Nepal, or, you know, some of the conflicts that were happening in Colombia, or in Africa. And so I had to not just learn about nonviolence and not just learn about Dr. King, but I began to study these conflict regions around the world and what was going on. And many of them had very similar kinds of issues um, in terms of the three great evils that Dr. King always mentioned about: economic injustice or poverty, the social injustice or discrimination, racism, and militarism, or a kind of a cultural tolerance and acceptance of violence as a way to solve problems. And this is true. Dr. King's wisdom holds true in almost any of these places around the world that are struggling with this. Well, the Kingian Nonviolence Training Program that Dr. Lafayette set up is still here. It's entering its third decade. We have, of course, the introductory core workshop, and then the 3 levels where people become trainers, because actually what Lafayette did at the center was not just to teach people nonviolence. He was really about creating a generation of nonviolence leaders, teachers, and trainers. He knew the importance of leadership and how people needed to have the knowledge and the skill in order to carry this dream and this vision of the beloved community forward. And so the structure that has become institutionalized with the center is the training of trainers, the level 2 advanced training, which is a seminar in leadership, organizing, and mobilizing. And level 3 recognizes and supports people who are really institutionalizing and internationalizing by developing a program or center. Center development is, of course, the ideal. But many people embark on projects and embed the training or the program in some way into their work setting, into their school, or into their university. Well, one of the things I learned was I knew so little about our own history of nonviolence in our own country. And reflecting back, I've had just, I would say, just a wonderful lifetime in the last dozen years of my work at the center directly, to meet and listen to and learn from, and to sit next to so many wonderful, important luminaries and heroes in nonviolence, and particularly in our own country. And some of this was, of course, facilitated by Dr. Lafayette and the civil rights tours and the pilgrimages to these civil rights historical sites down south. Made a couple of those journeys with him and the Faith and Politics Institute out of the U.S. Congress that the late John Lewis led. And on those trips and across other training opportunities, it was wonderful to meet and learn and listen to people like John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. C.T. Vivian, by the way, came to visit us, I'm going to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And during the Summer Institute, he was going to be a guest. You know, we thought it would be wonderful. He'd be a guest speaker and stay one day. He actually had so much fun. He asked, after the first day, he asked me if he could just stay for the rest of the 2 weeks. So we offered him a hotel and he said, no, he'd just stay in the residence halls with everybody else. He loved the community of people. And it was so very, very special to have someone with his experiences and his vision to be on hand with us every day, that Summer Institute. And it was a wonderful, wonderful to have him on our campus like that. Well, of course, Dr. Lafayette, of course, brought many people to our campus. Coretta Scott King, we had the opportunity to meet her when she visited and spoke at one of the fall commencements. Martin Luther King III, I've had an opportunity to meet him at some special meetings before dealing with nonviolence. The Gandhi King Global Initiative that the center belongs to a couple of falls ago at Stanford. And then one of the tours, we were able to meet Fred Shuttlesworth, you know, who was so influential in Alabama and in the Birmingham days. Andrew Young, Ruby Sales was a visitor to the campus. What a great woman she is. And just, you know, her teachings and her wisdom are just extraordinary. And Jesse Jackson, many others. We also had the center in 2006 sponsored, was one of the co-sponsors in the honors colloquium, and had an opportunity to meet and hear from people like Pete Seeger, Nora Guthrie, Augustine Lira, who wrote the songs and worked with Cesar Chavez, and of course, Buffy St. Marie, singer, songwriter, and activist against the Vietnam War. And so it's been just a wonderful learning opportunity for me to meet these people and to have an opportunity to cross paths with them. The International Nonviolence Summer Institute has been fantastic. I wish I could take you down memory lane. You know, the first one I was in directing in 2009, 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and last year virtually 2020. Those 12 summer institutes brought people from these dozens of countries, people who told stories of their own torture, their own brutality, their own efforts to change their communities, their own suffering. And when these people sit down to learn nonviolence, they are seriously here to learn nonviolence. In many cases, their lives depend on it, and they are very, very committed to this work. And what we taught them pales in comparison to what so many of them taught us. The center, of course, continues to fulfill its mission of leadership and center development. And we have 37 level 3 people over the last couple of decades, and there are probably more that I don't even know about, that have established some type of training or educational center or embedded this. And just some notables in India, the missionary priest, Father Anto, who came to visit with us a couple of summers and got all of his training with us, is responsible for a program that he calls Peace Channel. It's in India in the Northeast region in that tribal area. And he reaches over 20,000 youth with this program. And nonviolence training is a part of that. And it's also part of the master's degree social work program, which Dr. Father Anto leads and what he established there. And the reach that he has is just incredible there. And another, of course, notable leader, and there are many, I'm sorry I can't recognize all of you, but is Amani Tom Matabaro in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You may know that the Congo is one of the most violent places in the world for many reasons. Usually the conflict occurs over the mineral-rich resources of the Congo. But women there are also brutalized. There is a culture of rape, and it's a terrible place in many ways for many people. Amani came to the Summer Institute, and we asked everybody, what's your dream for coming? And he said, well, he didn't have a dream, but if he had to have one in one of the opening activities we had, he said it would be to create a peace school. And 3 years later, Amani, through God's graces, had been given by a very wealthy family in California in memory of their son who had passed away early. They had given him a large sum of money, which he built a peace school in the Congo. It's the first peace school of its kind in Africa. And Amani makes sure that every student and every teacher understands and knows Kingian nonviolence there as he learned it from us here at URI. Another great story is Raju Sarkar in Nepal. We've trained many people there, but Raju is one of the few people to actually establish a peace and nonviolence training center, the Himalaya Peace Studies Center. He's doing extraordinary work there to institutionalize nonviolence. And of course, one of the early leaders is Nana Darkwa from Ghana. I made a couple of trips to Ghana to start training programs there with his Youth Icons Ghana project. And now he's working as well on environmental violence problems there with environmental issues, doing great work, as many of these level 3s, level 2s, and level 1 people do. Let me speak about Gandhi, Experiments with Truth, because I've talked kind of about the dreams of institutionalizing and internationalizing nonviolence, but many of my experiences have been just simply experimental. Like when I first went to Nepal, I'd never been there. They called me up. They said, they're organizing a training. Can I come? They wanted me there in 2 weeks. I said, give me 3 weeks. I can't go right now. And so it's a very experimental journey, as much of nonviolence is. You have to have your dream and your vision and your principles, your knowledge and skill, and then you set off on the path, very much observing and learning in an experimental fashion. The greatest influences on Gandhi, of course, were, as told in his autobiography, was Leo Tolstoy, John Ruskin, and a famous favorite poet of his. And Tolstoy, of course, did not learn nonviolence on his own. He learned it from an American by the name of Aidan Ballou. And guess what? One of the things I never knew, but now I know, is that Aidan Ballou was born in Rhode Island, up near Cumberland. He eventually pursued a religious career with the Unitarian Universalists, and he founded a beloved community type of communal living around the spiritual values. It was called the Hopedale Community in Massachusetts. And Tolstoy himself credits Aidan Ballou with the influences of the nonviolence ideas and thinking. And of course, it was Aidan Ballou who influenced Tolstoy. Tolstoy, through letters and correspondence, influenced Gandhi. Gandhi, through his writings and teachings and his historic independence movement in forming the nation of India, influenced Dr. King. And Dr. King, of course, we're following along up here. Our center takes its place in this big path to promote the global beloved community And this is happening in many, many movements you see around the world, most notably going on today, Myanmar, the People's Uprising there, where people are students of and they study the tactics and strategies of peaceful, nonviolent social change. It's very, very difficult in places where there are brutal dictators who are eager to use violence against such movement leaders and demonstrators. Ruskin, Unto This Last was a book that had great influence and on Gandhi in terms of his economic principles. Gandhi said, "There's enough on earth for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed." This was one of the prompts we used. For 10 years, we had an 8th grade Gandhi essay contest. This was part of the idea of Nick and Ruby Delakia in the business college many years ago, following an honors colloquium. They wanted a follow-through project, and they came to the center, and we collaborated on an essay contest. And then we did it again the next year and the next year, and thousands of school children have participated over 10 years and learned and written about nonviolence based on the ideas of Gandhi. Gandhi was also an environmentalist. I'll spare you all of the readings of this, but basically early on, Gandhi was very concerned about the dangers in the world with environmental destruction and mass production and how it harmed our actual biosphere. And he wanted to design principles called Swaraj, where people could work in smaller communities that are economically sustainable without damaging and destroying our environment, having a better quality of life. Many of his ideas were taken and put into the Sustainable Development Goals of the previous decade. So Gandhi was brought forward really into the 21st century through the ideas of Dr. King. Gandhi assassinated in 1948, and only 20 years later, Dr. King assassinated in 1968. But when King embraced the ideas of Gandhi for using kind of a nonviolence, do no harm approach, not just to your neighbor, but to transform an entire society, this idea really came into its full fruition. And here we see people now, not just in the US, but all over the world, basically following these kinds of principles of change. So it was King's dream and it was Gandhi's experiments. And those dreams and experiments have been very much the way I've approached my work at the center as I reflect back on it. Gandhi's dream did become a reality. In 2016, I was there in India at the National Peace Meeting there in Nagaland, where we were doing the training of social workers. And I had the opportunity to meet Tushar Gandhi, Gandhi's great-grandson. And then 2 years ago at the Stanford Gandhi King Global Initiative, of which the center was a sponsoring partner, we had a wonderful time meeting Gandhi's granddaughter, Ela Gandhi, who is very active even to this day in South Africa. South Africa, of course, is where Gandhi began his own journey to nonviolence. Remember, he was thrown off the train in Pietermaritzburg there. King had the dream, but he had violent realities. Everyone who has a dream has to face the violent realities, the threats, the arrests, the beatings, the bombs, etc. But the dream of Martin Luther King did much of it come true. Supreme Court ended racial segregation in 1955 based on the Montgomery movement and the bus boycott. In 1964, based on the Birmingham actions and others, there was the Civil Rights Act passed. It was really a human rights act. In 1964, he was recognized by the Nobel Peace, with the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person at the time to receive it. The 1965 Voting Rights Act was the result of Selma. And in 67, 1 year before his murder in Memphis, to the very day, he gave a very important Riverside speech, speaking out publicly against the Vietnam War, which many would say was the beginning of the anti-war movement. It was an experiment for Dr. King, and but it continues. We're still facing many challenges to equality, to justice, to voting rights. Many of the things that they were both working for are still goals and challenges that we face today. And the way they approach those then is the way we must approach them today. And that's the importance of the center's work in educating and training people in nonviolence and peace. That day when Dr. King was murdered on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel could have been the end of Dr. King and his efforts. But actually, because of Bernard's carrying forth that vision, that final dream, we've established a center. And that center has been sustaining and growing in its impact in incredible ways. And the experiment of the center continues on. And some of the lessons that I've learned from this, one is to stay true to our mission. There are many, many things that are possible to do in the world of nonviolence and peace. We have a particular mission, though, and it's an important legacy of Dr. King, handed to us by Bernard Lafayette, and we treasure that. And that is our guiding light in all that we do. Every day, the center, as a director, I had to get up every day and say, what are we doing today to internationalize and institutionalize nonviolence education and peace training? And at the end of the day, I had to ask myself, what have we done to fulfill that mission? And that's an important lesson, to stay focused on the mission. Service is another lesson I learned as a director. Dr. King's view, those who study in our training programs learn that Dr. King had a servant leadership style of leadership. And so service is always at the forefront of everything that one does in directing and leading the center with the mission that it has. And we try to do this in many, many ways. There are many opportunities to serve. And of course, we provided for a decade very important peace and nonviolence work in Central Falls, working with children there in schools. For 10 years, we took teams of URI students, both undergrad and graduate students, to do weekly, every Friday in Central Falls. We trained and in classrooms directly teaching violence prevention and nonviolence and peaceful ways of addressing conflict to hundreds of children every week. I estimate over the 10 years that we trained and reached on a weekly basis throughout the entire school year, a weekly dose of nonviolence and peace for up to 2,000 children in the Central Falls community. And in the last few years, we were lucky enough to have URI students who were able to speak Spanish fluently as first language native speakers, and they were able to deliver the program in Spanish there, as well as assist me with the little Spanish I have in training and helping parents of those children. It was a wonderful project, and it was a wonderful way to provide service. Well, beloved community, everything we do has to be done in community. We try to serve the community in which the center is based, our own campus community, our local community with many programs and activities, and of course, reaching out around the world to everybody out there in the center's friendship and understanding of our own beloved community. Well, I learned I could not do this without teamwork. And I had the great fortune over many years to have a great team. I had so many wonderful students, too many for me to name. They assisted me. They became co-trainers. We taught approximately 60 students, 30 to 40 each semester, a nonviolence training course. And from that group, over 10 years or more, we gleaned the top people who scored the highest grades on the nonviolence content assessment exam. And those people were trained in how to assist us as co-trainers. And they became involved with the center. It helped us in many ways, co-training, running activities, programming with organizations on the campus. They worked in the center as social media coordinators, as website managers, as program activity leaders, as 101 orientation leaders. And the team of people, and here I have to mention, of course, that Tibetan Buddhist monk who sat down next to me many years ago at my first training, and his first training, Geshe Dr. Thupten Tindar. Because really, I don't think I could have managed the work I did in my grad program, my department, and the center without the help of my good dear friend Thupten. Thupten finished his training and he came back a year later and he said to me, actually, we were invited to go down to hear the Dalai Lama when he talked at Emory. And we met Thupten there. Thupten was involved in part of the staffing and arrangements there. And we met Thupten and he asked if he could come and join us at the center. And I said, well, of course, anytime. And he said, no, he meant to stay. And I said, well, we don't have any position for you, but if you want to come and volunteer. And he said, okay. And a few months later, he arrived and he's been with us ever since. And of course, during that time, he completed his master's degree in adult education, focusing on peace training and education. And he finished his PhD degree in May of 2019 in education, focusing on compassion, and conducted a great research study on our campus about compassion training. But we've had many, many people working and helping at the center over the years. Of course, most recently here, in addition to Thupten, Roberta Opara, our international scholar for the last couple of years, has been essential in our training and teaching, assisting and co-instructing with everything that we did there so beautifully, and such a great staff person to have, too, very dependable and reliable, and so helpful in many, many ways with everything. And of course, our staff team, Jennifer Diano, and before Jen, the wonderful Linda Lorenzo. When I took over the center, there was a change in staff, and Linda Lorenzo, through life circumstances, came to us on a half-time basis, and she was like an angel who helped really manage all the administrative and procedural things in the center. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to Linda and everyone who has worked at the center, both as a staff member and as a volunteer and as a student. Thank you so much. The team. Excuse me. Another thing I've learned, and I'll pass on, is marketing. I didn't understand this in the beginning. I thought everybody would just, love peace and nonviolence. But actually they love, like, basketball more than they do peace. And millions of dollars are donated to, to athletics and all kinds of other things at URI. And I do want to be thankful. Winnie, you mentioned the Sylvia Chanley Peace Professorship. And also how wonderful that was. That did enable me to make those first international trips. And also it enabled me to use those funds to decrease the cost of bringing students on those trips. So it was a wonderful, wonderful professorship gift. And I'm so happy that was established under your dean's guidance, and it lives on in many ways through great work of other faculty. Also, the Syrian Orions gave a large gift that we used to help with trainings. And so we're indebted to so many people. But the marketing of peace and nonviolence, I met a couple of people last year at the Stanford Gandhi King meeting, and they talked with me about marketing the unmarketed. I said, oh my gosh, you're talking about nonviolence. And they said, yes. They said, no one is marketing nonviolence and peace. You don't see commercials for it. You don't see movies about it. And so they were right. And it changed my thinking that we are being out-marketed. We're being out socially mediated by violence. The culture of violence is growing every day by leaps and bounds. And part of the center and part of one of the great lessons I learned is every day you have to fight the struggle to continue to put peace and nonviolence out there in the media, in the headlines, in the news. And there's plenty to say about it. It just gets overlooked. And so that's a very, very important lesson that I learned as a center leader. And of course, sustainability. Sustaining the center is so important. We have to think about how the work continues, not just how do you get through day by day or week by week, or you finish this year, but really you have to be, as King said, you had to have that visionary thinking. Why is nonviolence important? It's indispensable for our human survival. It improves cohesive living, cooperative living within societies and between nations. It promotes equitable and rapid development. If you don't have peace, you cannot have rapid economic development. You must have peace. War and violence is always destructive. Peace and nonviolence, always constructive. It's essential economically. And nonviolence, of course, helps us live in harmony with each other, which we so desperately need in a divided society that we have today in America. Why is you or I important? Why is the center important at the university? One, we have this very important treasure, this lasting final vision of Dr. King to educate and train people in nonviolence and peace, not just to want peace, but to learn how to get there. Two, it's not enough to just say, oh yeah, I'm peaceful. Oh yes, I like nonviolence. You must really study nonviolence to really understand it. You must not have just the will to live nonviolently. You must have the skill. Gandhi was not a great theorist. He was a practitioner. He practiced his theory. He had the skill day by day. He demonstrated his ideas. He lived them the way Dr. King did. So deep study is very important. I learned from Reverend Lawson, who was a great teacher of Bernard's, that nonviolence, before you do anything in nonviolence, you have to really learn it. You have to really study it and understand it. You can't just race out to a protest and hold up a sign. That a movement and real social change takes commitment to learn and study. And that's what the university is all about. So thirdly, the university is about preparing future leaders. And we need a future generation of people in nonviolence and peace. Fourth, evolution. Our very survival, we've got a health pandemic, we've got an environmental crisis, we've got a social justice threats going on. Our democracy is threatened. We still have thousands of nuclear warheads primed and ready to go off in just a few moments, pointing all over the world. We are in a the midst of multiple existential threats in the world. And the way out of this, the way that we can evolve as a human species is through nonviolence. There is no other way. King said, the choice is not between violence and nonviolence, it's between non-existence and nonviolence. Another great idea that I learned from Reverend Lawson was that nonviolence is actually democracy. Democracy is nonviolence. At its core, it's about people learning to live together and overcoming disagreements, conflicts that inevitably happen, and to do so in a peaceful, nonviolent way. We do it in our country by voting mostly. And so it's very important for the future of a democratic society that a university be producing people who understand at the core of democracy is nonviolence. And of course, we're all in this together. If the university wants to be truly a global university, as all universities do now, we have to recognize that we are already a global beloved community. You don't have to create one. It's already there. You just have to go and uncover it. You have to expose the global beloved community that is there. That's what I have learned, and that's what many people who have come and trained and studied with us eventually learn. Well, one of the things that we're excited about is the Nonviolence and Peace graduate education component in the MA degree in International Relations that Kristen Johnson was mentioning earlier. And that, of course, has 3 specializations, and we're very, very pleased that nonviolence and peace coursework, thinking, training, even some experiences are made possible through the global peace specialization of that program. And that program, I've watched it over the last several years, and it's the students are being recruited there. They're going to be doing fantastic things. And this is really an exciting development for the center. And it is the manifestation of how the vision of the center can be embedded into the institution at the graduate level. I want to just say quickly about our inner peace, healthy minds. And one of the great lessons I have to reflect on is that nonviolence is not just something outside of us, it is within us. And all of the great leaders, thinkers, writers, authors, activists, they all embrace this notion. And this has been beautifully brought to our campus and to our center, the work of Geshe Dr. Thupten Tendar. We've had the mystical arts of Tibet monks with us for a week. They've made the mandala. We've had Geshis and lamas and rinpoches and all kinds of just wonderful teachers come in on a regular basis over the last decade as part of this Inner Peace program, and they have really enhanced the opportunity for students at URI as well as the general public to learn more about how we can all be more peaceful, how we can really find the kind of true happiness, not just the instant pleasures that our modern life is offering us, but true contentment through this inner peace, and in a way that actually helps us have a healthier mind. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that through his compassion training and research, we were able to visit with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in August of 2019. And that was such a very, very special life moment for me. And it was wonderful. And I believe that the compassion training research that Thupten has initiated at the center really helps open the door to the kind of ethical and compassion training and education initiative that the Dalai Lama now is advocating. Well, I mentioned that nonviolence is helpful with our environmental crisis. I'm going to just go through the rest of this and say, to get to the end here. Oh my goodness. Well, I'll leave you with this. Are we willing to imagine and be creative enough? you know, we've lost our imagination. There's no imagination in violence. You just, you know, hurt and kill people. But if we're not careful, we'll lose our imagination. We'll lose our creative thinking to envision a better world to live in. So we have to dream big. And are we able to be courageous enough then to actually live nonviolence and peace as a way of life? And that is the grand experiment. And I will just stop here. I want to appreciate everyone for your attention and listening. And a wise man once said nothing. And so I've said way too much. And so for now, I'll say nothing and leave you all with our motto at the center that we've been marketing: think peace, live peace, and be peace. I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow.
Bravo.